Good afternoon and good afternoon. I'm Dr. James Smith Jr. and welcome back to another episode of the Dr. James Show. If I seem a little more fired up than I typically am, it's because I am. I'm still flying high from our boot camp last week in Philadelphia. We rocked the house. It was a great time. And actually, our guest for today's show was a participant at the boot camp. And it was my first time meeting her in person. Her name is Dr. Talee Vang. She is a licensed psychologist with expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's probably one of the strongest advocates for equity and health and diversity and inclusion that I've ever met. She is a powerhouse. I'm looking forward to her sharing her wisdom, her experience with us. Dr. Vang, welcome to the Dr. James Show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I can't wait.
Absolutely. Again, you did the darn thing last week, bringing all that energy and poise and wisdom to the boot camp. So it was great seeing you again so quickly.
Yes, thank you.
Now, Dr. Vang, I came across this picture that had a caption. And the caption is, every day you get to fight for justice one way or another. Tell me about that quote and tell me about this picture.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting you to have this picture in the quote, Dr. Jim. So really, it's about my ability to channel my passions and my values. And so I know that ever since I was younger, I've wanted to do social justice work, and I have been able to do that now. And so in everything that I do, it is in alignment with my values. And so I feel so fortunate and so blessed. And that is why I have that.
Now we see that picture of you looking like you're ready to be the biggest advocate in the world. And then we have this picture of you with your lab coat on. Talk to us about that, where you are, what you do during the day. Bring us up to speed.
Sure. Well, by training, I'm a clinical psychologist, a health psychologist, and here I am at my organization, Hennepin Healthcare, which is located downtown Minneapolis, Minnesota. I did a lot of work in primary care behavioral health. I was a primary care behavioral health psychologist. So with my lab coat on, and really, this was during the pandemic. So coming into the clinics and coming into the hospital to do the work, right? Because mental health is also a part of our physical health, and we really need these services. So that is my clinical background.
So we have those two pictures there. When did this journey start for you? Your career path where you decided, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. I want to be an advocate. I want to be a psychologist. I want to be a fighter for social justice. I mean, did this start when you were in school, in college, when you were a little girl? Talk to us about your journey.
My journey into being a speaker, an educator, health equity expert, and psychologist, it started in high school in a little black box known as Central Touring Theater. Central Touring Theater was a program that allowed students to go in there and create our own plays and create our own stories and tell our stories. And that was where I discovered spoken word. And I started writing poetry and performing poetry. And I realized that I could use spoken word as a mechanism to raise awareness about social injustices. And so I started performing all over the Twin Cities, and then West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, and started teaching others about the power of poetry, the power that we can, and the healing powers of poetry, especially. That's where it all started. But eventually, I decided raising awareness just wasn't enough for me. I needed to do more. I wanted to do more. And so that's really when I started focusing on psychology. Psychology and human behavior is something that I'm very interested in. Human behavior is at the root of everything that we do, right?
Dr.
Systemic.
Vang, was it any turning point, something that happened where you said, now I have to do more? Or it was just a continuation of the journey you were in the midst of?
At that time, it was a continuation for me at that time. And so this was probably about in the middle of my undergrad years when I decided I think really just recognizing in this nation, I need to leverage my power. And where do I get that power from being an Asian American woman, right? Because there's a lot of isms that are working against me as an Asian American woman. And so realizing if I can obtain an education and if I could just go for that highest education that I can get, then maybe I would be able to have a larger influence, a larger impact on the systems that are oppressive.
Did your parents urge you to move in that direction, or this was just something you said, no, I'm doing this. I'm doing this. And was there ever any fear? Did you fear getting involved in this capacity, or you just put your head down and moved right on in?
My parents were extremely supportive. Dr. James, you don't know this, but I was originally going to be an actress. My plans were to go to Hollywood. Okay, so I was so serious about going to Hollywood after my undergrad degree, and my parents were super supportive. My dad said, if you are serious about wanting to be a movie, actress, I will pay for your apartment in Hollywood so you can focus. And that's how supportive they were. That didn't turn out. One of the reasons is because I fell in love with my husband and decided, okay, well, that's not going to happen. And also, the older I got, the more I just really became in tune with the injustices that surround us.
Was it because of what was happening, or was it because of what was happening and some of the things that you experienced in your life, or a combination of both?
A combination of both. At that time, I want to say this was around 2006, 2007. In the Hmong community, there was a lot of local, by local, I mean from Minnesota, Hmong advocates that came together that really wanted to raise awareness to the genocide that was happening towards the Hmong people in Laos. And so there was a silent genocide, right, that was going on ever since the Vietnam War. And we pulled together, myself and a bunch of other wonderful Hmong artists and singers and rappers. We came together to create music festivals to talk about the genocide that was happening. So that was also happening at the same time, where I decided we really need to make changes.
With that said, I'm going to save this question for later, but I'll ask it now. Since you are in that DE&I space and you do a lot of work talking about microaggressions and unconscious bias and topics like that, from a societal standpoint, do you think we've gotten better, worse, or it's still the same on how we manage diversity, equity, and inclusion in our society?
And how we manage it. I think that we're making progress, so it's not the same. I think because of everything that has been going on in our society, all the civil unrest, all of the killings, the unjust killings of Black and Brown people, it is starting to come to the forefront. Whereas before, it wasn't as common for workplaces to discuss these things. It is now, employees are now demanding, we need to address these things, right? We can no longer be silent, because to be silent is to be complicit, and we need to actually take a stand. And so there's this urging of employees for their organizations, for their leaders to take a stand and say, that's not okay.
What are some of the challenges you face in doing the work that you do? Whether it's in a hospital setting, whether it's peer-to-peer, whether it's at a conference or coaching, what are the challenges that are related to diversity, equity, inclusion that you are faced with?
I think one of the biggest challenges right now is people are so afraid to talk about race and racism. There's such a fear. It's such a unspoken taboo to talk about it, that to bring it up, people already are closed off. And so that makes it, change really, really difficult.
Yeah, where the barrier is up and what you're saying does not apply to me. And even if it does apply to me, I'm not going to own it and I'm not going to share it. Yes, it's challenging work, but I love the fact that you immerse yourself in it every day. A question for you. And those of you who have questions, please put them in the chat room or comments. Would love to hear from you. Want to know, Dr. Vang, what is health equity and how does psychology tie into it?
Well, psychology ties into health equity in so many ways. And in order for me to really do this question justice,
Yeah,
I want to start by talking about the person, right? And then I want to talk a little bit about the clinician or the provider within the health systems. And so
yes.
as it relates to the individual person, if we want to understand the relationship between psychology and health equity, we need to learn or know more about the mind-body connection, right? So let's talk about how our brains respond in high stress situations, right? When you're in a high stress situation, so let's pretend this is your brain. Okay, I'm going to go into my brain.
I love visual aids. I love visual aids.
Right brain, right, Dr.
Yes,
Smith?
yes.
So if this is your brain and this is the front of your brain right here, the back of your brain, we have an internal structure or part of the brain, and then the cortex that wraps around. This middle part right here is where our fight, flight, or freeze response is housed, right? Our amygdala. The prefrontal cortex here is the part of our brain that allows us to think about thinking, to analyze, to think about consequences, right? And so this part of our brains actually don't develop until we're fully developed until we're 25, but we're operating here. And so the amygdala is what connects us with other animals because it's your basic survival instincts. And our prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that actually helps us or distinguishes us or separates us from other animals. When you're faced with a high stress situation, let's pretend a tiger comes right in front of us. The way that our brain responds is that our prefrontal cortex would go offline. We would be operating only out of fight, flight, fear, that kind of immediate response. And then once the tiger, let's say, gets spooked and runs away, our prefrontal cortex kind of comes back online and we can think. Quick example of this is, let's say there's a fire and somebody's screaming, oh my gosh, call 911, call 911. And the person next to, or there's like a crowd of people and somebody says, okay, I'll call. What's the number? What's the number, right? Because your brain is on, I just need to act, right? And so that's how our brains respond to stress. And our bodies are also responding by elevating our heart rate. The sugars are not getting absorbed in our bodies. Our limbs are starting to actually get inflamed to protect ourselves. This is a natural reaction to stress. What is not natural is for us to live among tigers. People of color have to be on alert all the time. So their brains are always like this, and they're always in the fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so guess what? Over time, our body starts to malfunction. Studies show we have higher rates, people of color have higher rates of type 2 diabetes, hypertension, gastrointestinal issues. These things are related. So health equity, right, and psychology, the relationship goes to the very core of the mind-body connection. And this is also why we need to make sure that our healthcare systems are addressing all of these things, because Black and brown people are dying at much higher rates than their white counterparts.
You went deep already. We're just in the first 15 minutes. That's great stuff. Great connection. There is a question in the chat room, Dr. Vang. It says, what are some factors do you feel that contribute to social injustices in this country? Let me read it again.
Yeah.
What are some factors do you feel that contribute to social injustice or injustices in this country?
That's a great question. One of the things that's coming to mind right now, it is the division that is between people of color. There's division between Black and Asian communities, Latinx and Asian, Latinx and Black, East African and Black Americans. There is division within our communities. Why? Because it was by design, right? And so when we think about what keeps the powers in place, what keeps the oppressive system, the system is a very well-oiled machine. What keeps it running? It is that it is very skilled. The system is really skilled at continuing to divide us. It is white supremacy, right? And so this is something that is a social factor that we need to really be mindful of and to be aware of in order for us to overcome and not fall into that rhetoric.
What keeps you going? I've started doing diversity, equity, inclusion work with my first organization, my first job out of college back in the 80s. And here we are, 2021, and we're kind of having this, not the same conversation, but a related conversation. Will we ever get there? And what is it going to take to get there? Is there obtainable? There as in equitable, equity, inclusion, people feeling empowered. We won't be saying underrepresented groups anymore. Is that obtainable?
I have to believe it is. It is not without barriers. It is not without its own fights, right? But at my very core, I have to believe that it is. I have to believe in the goodness of all of us. For one, because our children need to have a better world, right? And that's consistent across the generations. I think that we want to make sure that we improve the world, even if it's just a little bit, for our children. What keeps me going is believing in that, and then also it's finding my tribe. It's finding people that get it, that I can go to, and we can re-energize and refuel each other, and we can lift each other up in this work. Otherwise you burn out. And I've burned out before, right? Like I hated this work for a long time. I hated it. I didn't want to go near it. And it took a lot of just internal work for me to come back to this work because it's such a core part of my identity and who I am.
Was it individual internal work, or did you talk to others, mentors, colleagues, peers? Was it reading? Was it listening? What went into you getting your fervor back, your fight back?
It was a community of people, I have to say. There was definitely internal work that had to be done, but being around others who see the struggle, who've been through it, being around mentors who've been in it for a while to be able to guide you is really priceless. And that's one of the things that I think is important for us and for our youth to recognize, is that we need mentors.
Yeah.
We need mentors.
Yeah. Dr. Vang, I know you spend a great majority of your time each day at the hospital, but every now and then you get out to speak. We have a brochure or a picture with you on the cover that discusses what we're going to be speaking on that day. Let's take a look, and I'd love for you to speak to it some. Racism and social rejection are killing us, presented by Dr. Talee Vang. Registered now. This was in August of this year. Talk to us about that opportunity.
This was an opportunity that was brought to me by the Minnesota Doctors for Health Equity Coalition. And so the group started not too long after the murder of George Floyd, and they're really bringing together providers, but really anybody in healthcare that wants to address health equity. And I was invited to talk about the neurocognitive impact of racism. And one of my
neurocognitive impact. Can we get any deeper?
And you know, I mean, it's one of those things where this isn't just talk, right? This is something that has been studied, is being studied, and is being shown as really impacting people of color, and social exclusion hurts. I'm going to say, okay, so one of the main takeaways from that talk I'll share with you, Dr. James.
Yeah.
Social exclusion hurts. And when they did a brain image, right, it's a functional MRI, they found that the parts of our brain that lights up when we get a cut lights up when we feel socially excluded, which means our brains interpret social pain the same way or similar ways it interprets physical pain. It hurts.
Wow.
That's powerful.
It is extremely, extremely. Woo. Now, I want to shift just a little. I want to stay with psychology, but in a different way. I know you talk about depression, anxiety. I want to share a brief clip of you sharing your thoughts, or a few thoughts, about depression.
It is completely normal to feel sad from time to time. So how do you know when something is shifting from a normal experience of sadness to something that is much more serious? Let's start by talking about common symptoms of depression. I like to group the symptoms of depression into two different categories: physical symptoms and cognitive symptoms. Let's start with physical symptoms of depression. Oftentimes, people describe physical symptoms of depression in terms of feeling fatigue or low energy, low motivation, and then also sometimes crying a lot. Cognitive symptoms of depression can include difficulty concentrating or focusing. It's not uncommon for people to report having to reread passages over and over again because it's hard for them to focus on what they've just read. Other cognitive symptoms of depression can include negative self-talk or hopelessness. For some people, they may find that their experience of depression may be more cognitive, or others may find it may be more physical. It's also possible that for some, depression consists of both physical and cognitive symptoms of depression. Isn't it normal from time to time?
Do you find yourself having those conversations with patients, with folks during your sessions, coaching? How does the whole depression narrative play a role in what you do?
I think, yes, I do find myself having those conversations with many different people. And I want to say, too, that when I have those conversations, I do make it clear this is not about diagnosing you, right, or diagnosing your friend, your spouse. This is information. And that's one of the things that I am very, very serious about, is sharing information. I'll tell you, I have these conversations with a lot of people in communities of color, because oftentimes there's such a stigma with mental health and with getting mental health care, right? And with mental illness, that we don't really actually know, like, what is depression? How do I know when I'm depressed? What is trauma? What is anxiety? And so when I share that information, it's really so that people can take that and better understand and put words to maybe their experiences, and maybe think, wow, sometimes maybe I do really feel down. Maybe I do need to go and talk to somebody. So it's really about empowering people when I'm sharing information like this.
Good stuff. Thank you. Thank you. There's a comment in the chat room. I feel that the media, Hollywood, etc., play both. Let me move for a second. Play both sides or more of the issue quite often. What are your thoughts on that? Again, we were talking about what contributes to the inequities, what contributes to the injustices. When the person says he or she believes, or it's Tom, that he believes that the media, Hollywood, plays a role, or they play both sides or more of the issue quite often, and they're asking for your thoughts.
I think that the media is incredibly, incredibly powerful. I'd like to share with you some of the research, and I know I'm like going to the research because I thought it was.
I love psychologists, all that research up in there. Listen, you put the work in. What they say, the tassel was worth the hassle. So
yeah, yes, and because the research is profound, I think. And in one study, they showed how bias can increase or decrease, right? So in this one study, they had study participants come, and they had the study participants take the implicit attitudes test from Harvard University, and it was specifically on bias against Islam, right? And so what the study did was they had these participants take this implicit bias test, a pre-test. They had them watch US and Iraq war news coverage, a whole series, and then they had them take the implicit attitudes test again. They found that by watching the US and Iraq war news coverage from the United States, their bias against Muslims increased significantly. In another study, they had college students take the implicit attitudes test, but this was with regards to same-sex couples. And then they had the college students watch a TV series called 6 Feet Under, whose main character is a gay man in this really loving relationship. And in this study, because the series does not introduce the negative stereotypes of gay men, the students watched the series, took the implicit attitudes test again at the end, and their bias towards same-sex couples decreased significantly. So yes, the media is incredibly powerful, which is why I encourage all of us to read books about and by people of color, right? Where they're telling their own histories and they're telling their own stories, because we want to make sure that the content that we're consuming, whether books, podcasts, movies, is going to do a good job of actually representing what we want to learn about.
That's great. Thank you. Follow-up question from someone else in the chat room. Dr. Vang, would you say that the reason why it is difficult for people to talk about DE&I is because our past in or of America is so, I'm going to say, conflicted? We're not proud of that, hence it making it more difficult for people to speak about it.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of misplaced shame. There's a lot of guilt that gets in the way. And I think with that, like we know that, and working through those emotions can be really, really hard. And at the same time, there's a lot of resources out there. And so you have to have the desire. It's a personal journey. And if you have the desire, it's as easy as going to the internet and looking up resources. And so the method to starting our own journey is definitely there, but we have to be willing to. We have to have that desire.
And there needs to be a level of commitment, not just interest.
Right.
Interest is not going to get you to the finish line. Commitment will. We showed earlier a little clip of you talking about depression. I want to show another clip. This one is you talking a little bit about anxiety and providing the symptoms of anxiety. Let's take a look at the clip, and then I would love for you to give some more thought, rationale to the topic.
I've had many people come up to me and ask me about what anxiety is and how do you know when it becomes a problem? Let's go ahead and talk about common symptoms of anxiety. I find it helpful to group these symptoms in two different groups: physical symptoms and cognitive symptoms. Let's start with physical symptoms. Common physical symptoms of anxiety include sweaty palms, muscle tension, because we carry stress and worry in our bodies. You may have really tense muscles at the end of the day and not really understand why. Sometimes we don't even know when we are feeling anxious if we're not really in tune with our bodies. Other symptoms that are physical symptoms also include restlessness, feeling on edge, or like you just have some kind of pent-up energy, you don't really know what to do with it. Cognitive symptoms of anxiety include thinking too much, thinking about things that you should have done, could have done, or worrying about loved ones, worrying about your future, unable to stop or control the worry. Other cognitive symptoms of anxiety might include inability to concentrate or your mind just going blank. Sometimes It also means that you might have difficulty sleeping because your mind just won't turn off. People also find that they may feel really angry, irritated easily. It's possible that someone might experience mostly physical symptoms of anxiety, but they don't have a lot of the worrying or the overthinking. It's also possible that someone may have a lot of the cognitive symptoms of anxiety, but they don't really feel some of the more physical symptoms. And
There must be a lot of anxiety in our country.
Yes, yes. Now, so a little bit about this video.
Yes.
I think it's helpful to know that anxiety is there's a lot of functionality to anxiety, right? And so if I have a big talk that's coming up and I felt incredibly comfortable, no big deal, I just show up and then I just do it, I have more chances of me messing up because I didn't prepare. So that anxiety helps me to actually do what I need to do a good job. It's when it's out of control, right? It's when you can't stop thinking. It's when you're having panic attacks for no reason, or things like that, where you just have unmanaged stress, that it becomes problematic. So I think it helps. So for talking about it can help to normalize it, while also helping others to understand when it's time to actually regulate it. Because anxiety is so common. And there are some really great techniques and tools out there. Therapists can definitely help you in regulating those symptoms.
It's amazing to me, your range. You move from DE&I to psychology to stress to depression, anxiety, social injustice. Do you ever rest? Do you ever just sit back?
I do. Sometimes I just knock out for a little while, but it's hard to rest when there's so much that, I don't know, I feel like sometimes there's just so much that needs to be done.
This ties into our next question in the chat room. I guess the person was feeling me. How do you maintain your own good mental health, just as a person in this society dealing with injustices and also dealing with your own professional battles? What advice do you have on this for others?
Yeah.
Powerful, powerful. How does a landscaper keep his or her own lawn immaculate?
It takes a lot of, it definitely takes a lot of work. And I think that the people in my life, so my spouse, my parents, our siblings, they have been instrumental in helping me outside of everything that I'm doing. And so I would not be able to do anything that I'm doing without them. But I also feel as though I am incredibly lucky that I understand that my profession is in psychology, because I have training in this. I have an understanding of things that I shouldn't be doing, right? Self-disclosure, a few weeks ago, I had COVID. It was one of those breakthrough cases. And when I lost my sense of smell, like 3 days in, I started to feel panicky. I've never had a panic attack before. And my mind went to, Talee, you know what you need to do to not panic. And so I was able to utilize the skill, and I was able to help myself. So I feel lucky that I have that base knowledge as well, but it's the people around me that keep me going. Otherwise, I couldn't do it. I don't think I could. I would burn out.
In keeping that narrative going, people around you, I stumbled upon a picture with you holding a book of one of those people that's around you that I think plays a role in helping to keep you fired up. It's a book that's called The Pursuit of Racial Justice Beyond Ally. Talk to us about that book and how it's helped you in your work.
Yes, the book resonated significantly with my own experiences. As Dr. Maisa Akbar would talk about in her book, the instances where allies have maybe thought they shown up, but they didn't show up, and the impact of that, or the second guessing of microaggressions that lots of people of color have to endure. And so it really resonated with me. And I have to say, shout out to Dr. Maisa Akbar. She's a good friend of mine, and she's also a member of the tribe that I've developed. So much about this picture and about Dr. Maisa Akbar and about the book does definitely contribute to that village that we were just talking about.
This just resonated with me because I had that epiphany last year during the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, where I said, I have to do more. I have to do more. I'm a speaker. I have the privilege of the platform. I could share more views. And up to that point, outside of diversity sessions, I had played it safe. I guess you call it psychological safety. I said, if I do this, this will happen. Our company won't do well. Clients will run away.
I call that anxious avoidance.
Yes, yes. Well, I retired from that club. I tore up my membership card, so it's full steam ahead. Dr. Vang, tell us about a time when you were having one of those crucial conversations with someone about inequities or biases or microaggressions, and they weren't buying it. How did you maintain your poise? And did you get him, her, them to shift their mindset? Or did you say, that's a conversation to be continued? Because I find that some practitioners want to baptize you in inclusion water and get you to see the light, and they will continue to pound. I'd like to know, what do you do in those situations?
I think similar to the story that you shared, Dr. James, about the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, there was a part of me that decided, I'm going to stop asking for permission. Because up until then, I kept asking for permission. Let me do this work. I can do DEI work. I can do more than clinical work. I want to have an impact in systems. Please give me a chance. Give me an opportunity. After that happened, inside myself, I decided I can't wait anymore. If I keep waiting for others to give me permission, nobody will believe in me, right? And who's going to give me that permission? Something I learned from boot camp, right? This past week. Yes. Why am I giving my power away? How do I get my power back? And so I stopped asking for permission, and I developed my own training, and I started to actually go out and say, I will do this for free, because right, for free. And I don't recommend that. Let me just say, I don't do it often.
People are looking you up right now. They said, she do this for free.
At that time, because the need was so great, and I figured people don't know what they don't know, and I felt like I needed to do this, and so I did, and great things came from it, right? Because more and more people started saying, yes, we need that. Can you please bring that over here? In my role here at Hennepin Healthcare, I am the Health Equity and Education Director, and I get to bring in all the training and education of health equity into our hospital system. I get to train our providers, our nurses, our non-patient facing employees on these things, and these things that are so critical when our patients are walking through our doors. How do we change for ourselves as colleagues and for our patients, so that we can really get at the health disparities, the gaps in health outcomes? So yes, I would say similarly, it wasn't until recently when I realized I need to stop asking for permission.
Yeah. You are helping to change, shape, create the culture of your workplace. And when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion in healthcare, wow, that's a whole nother narrative. But folks, Dr. Vang reaches people in another way. She is a poet. I want you to just listen to this brief clip of her talking about healing.
Healer, poem written by Talee Vang. H. Hey you, I see you. I see how you use your naked hands to hold and comfort the pain of others. The dark corners, the labyrinth of walls behind where people hide their shame. You crawl in with them every day to offer companionship, reassurance. Though there may be times when you might take a bit longer before you can find your way out of that darkness and return home. Emotions course through your veins as you take on the weight of the world, your commitment to bettering it, and the reality of the responsibilities that are relentless and demands your attention.
You are huge. You are huge. Oh my goodness.
Can I tell you about this?
Please, please,
Okay.
please.
I, working in a healthcare system, our healers, and I use that term very intentionally because it goes beyond the nurses and the doctors. These include everybody that shows up every day, cultural healers, spiritual healers, burnt out. They are burnt out. Not only are they working to heal others, but they need to heal from the grief and pain of losing their loved ones, of having to face social injustices themselves. And so I worked with a core group of people at Hennepin Healthcare, and we did this virtual open mic type where we invited our healers throughout Hennepin Healthcare, and we said, put together a performance piece. It doesn't have to be a poem. You can sing, you can play an instrument, put together, something about how you heal to help your colleagues heal. So it was actually a compilation of contributions from so many people throughout the healthcare system. I was so heartened to see submissions of providers, of chaplains, all submitting their own poems, their own songs, and people who just received also got to partake in healing.
What a great experience, but also what a great exercise. People are always looking for ideas, tips, techniques, icebreakers to ask the group in the beginning or at some point, how do you heal? Are you healed? Something tells me that would be an amazing conversation, an amazing exercise to use at some point. But I'm not going to let you off the hook, Dr. Vang. You said you used to do some spoken word. What? Can we have just a little something, just a little bit of what you did, what you do, but give us some spoken word. I'm sure everyone watching and will be watching saying, do it, Talee.
All right, I'll do it just for you, Dr. James. I will do it. I'm going to share a spoken word piece that I wrote in high school. It was.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so, it's been a long time. Let me do this.
Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check.
Okay. It doesn't matter if you're Black or white, but I'm not African American nor am I Caucasian. I'm simply Asian. A race that is seemed to be forgotten about when classroom discussions about racism arises and chases them back to the slavery days and how things changed for them in a lot of ways. Of course, you're going to say that you try not to stereotype people of color. So why is it that when you look at me, all you see is a quiet Asian girl that is shy and unable to project her voice, who's only able to make egg rolls, and you're surprised to see that I can make my tongue roll, pronouncing the letter R, raining, raise, ruthless, right, R. Are you understanding me? And when you speak, you need not slow down or raise your voice. I'm not deaf nor am I slow. I speak another language, but English I know. So how am I supposed to prove that I know my ABCs, my 1, 2, 3s, my AEIOUs, because I'm no different than any of you. I go through racism, prejudice, and stereotypes too.
Oh, yes. Psychologist, poet, author, consultant, speaker, coach, and she finds time to rest. She finds time to be a wife, to be a mom, children, and you haven't even gotten started yet. Someone says, let me go to it. Wow, wow. Dr. T is a powerhouse. Q&A. Let's go by the Q&A. Say that. Okay. You are amazing. Bravo. And you're free. No, I didn't say that. Wow, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Vang. Mm, mm.
Thank you.
Hey, actually, before we go to the Q&A, what inspired that poem? What was happening in your life as a teenager where you were able to get that in the mix and you weren't afraid to get dirty? You were attempting to heal at that juncture. What was happening?
So in high school, I was asked a question, and I was asked if I consider myself a person of color. I didn't know the answer to that. As a young high school student, I wondered, can I consider myself a person? What is a person of color?
Mm.
And because I contemplated that question so much, I had to really reflect on my experience as an Asian woman and the invisibility that Asians have had to endure for so long in this nation. And it was really from that painful realization of this invisibleness that I hold with me, that I wrote this piece, that was able to actually say, you know, I am a person of color. I get, I am oppressed in so many different ways. And to really to find my voice, right? My voice and to own it.
And yes, you do. Yes, you do. From the chat room, there's a question that says, does your poetry and spoken word give you the ability to breathe? Do you see yourself publishing a book on your spoken word?
Oh.
In her spare time, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I don't know that I've thought about publishing my poems. It's been so long since I've really written. It has been a healing part of my being, and so sometimes when I am really stressed out, I do use it to heal. But I'll consider that. So thank you for.
Don't say I'm a try. She said I'm considerate.
I know better.
Yes, Dr. Vang, you mentioned the role your parents played in your life, your journey. I stumbled across a gift that you gave your parents when you graduated. Let's take a look. Talk to me about it.
I am so surprised, Dr. James. You really do have to surprise me.
The caption, basically, your mom had said, this is what you gave her after you earned your PhD. What went into that creativity? What were you thinking? Love the picture. Look at you all doctorish.
They have been such a critical part of who I am today. And I think in ways that they don't even know. My mom is a powerful Hmong woman. When she first came to this country, so I arrived in the United States as a refugee at 2 years old. My parents must have been 18, 19, right? And my dad went to college. And you think about that, a refugee, somebody who spent most of his years in a refugee camp, he came here, went to the U of M. My mom said, I want to go to college too.
Wow.
And at that time, it wasn't really something that Hmong women did, because we were first a refugee population that were trying to just really kind of gain a foothold. We needed to work, and women were seen as, you need to be with the kids. But my mom paved the way. She said, nope, I'm going to go to school. She's a nurse. She became a nurse. And that was incredible for me. There's so much to who my mom is as a woman that has informed me, and my dad as well, because I shared with you, my dad has been very supportive of my dreams. But there's something that he does in the Hmong culture. There are still, there's a patriarchy, right? And in the Hmong culture, my dad, the way that he advocates for me, the way that he fights for me, he gets a seat at the table. It's not as easy for me to get a seat at the table as a woman.
Sure.
And when he's at the table, he talks me up. He lifts me up. And so he tells people about me and my gifts and my skills. And he creates a seat at the table for me. And sometimes it's not an actual seat, but sometimes it's really just presence. And so these strategies and these techniques that my parents have done throughout my whole entire lifetime that have allowed me to get to where I am. That's not to mention that my parents and my in-laws as well. I had 4 kids throughout the master's and doctorate's program, okay? They helped watch my kids every single day because I couldn't afford daycare. My husband was working, right? And weekends, my husband watched my kids. So it was this like extreme support system that I had. Thank you for allowing me time to recognize them too.
Thank you for recognizing them. Oftentimes we recognize them too late.
Mm-hmm.
You do a lot of coaching, training, speaking. What's something you want your audiences to get? What's something you want them to know before they leave? Is there any one thing in particular? Is there a Dr. Vang special sauce or ingredient that they need to have a more productive journey? What do you want them to know?
So I will say, the one thing that I would like for people to really take away is right now, there is a polarizing politicizing of racism, the concept of race and racism. When we politicize race and racism, it makes us afraid, even more afraid to talk about it because, we don't want to get political. I want to ask everyone to resist that because the concept of race, though it's a construct, it is a construct that has consequences for Black and brown people. And if we politicize that and we allow it to be politicized, then it will be silenced once more. And we can't afford that. There's way too many people dying, way too many people that are being negatively impacted for us to allow the concept of race to be politicized. So that's the big thing that I think is incredibly important for everyone who's listening and watching to really take away. We have to actively resist that.
Dr. Vang, when does this behavior or lack thereof, when does it start? Because when we're young, we have no fear. As we're growing up, no fear. We ask questions. We want to know. That's why they say children always say, why? When do we stop? When do we start being PC, not politically correct, poor communicators? When does it start?
So I believe, and this here I go into theory, okay? I believe in the theory called RCT, relational cultural theory. What that theory says is that when we get older, we want to belong. We want to connect so bad that we find parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of, parts of ourselves that we don't like, and we work hard to hide it. When we make connections with parts of us that are hidden, we'll never truly feel connected because we won't feel like we're fully seen or fully loved because we know we're hiding parts of ourselves. And so it starts when we start to get older and understand the importance of that social connection, right? When we start to understand and desire that, that's when we start to actually self-correct and become poor communicators because we're trying to hold back. We want to be liked. We want to be included. What we find is people are their most happiest when they can positively and confidently say, I don't agree with that because that's not what my value is. And so when you can show up as you are truly, and people still say, I really like you. Wow, I love you. That's when we feel seen and authentically loved.
And it's one of the reasons why organizations are still struggling with this narrative, with this construct. They make it seem so difficult. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. Ask a question, a well-intended question, and then listen.
Yeah.
Then ask another one, and then listen. When I started doing this work back in the 80s, there was some apprehension and fear because I thought all I knew about was being a 30-something-year-old Black man. I didn't know enough about this huge construct called diversity, equity, inclusion. And I didn't know if I was equipped to do it, but I did. What equip you to do it and to continue to do it, considering all the balls you juggle, everything that's going on? We talked a little bit about it earlier, but is there an inner fire? There's something else where you have no fear. You're going to speak truth to power, continue to educate and share data and studies. What is it about what's going on and how you're wired that keeps you going?
I think, well, I know. So I asked myself that a while ago too. This is before I actually understood or learned about my history, my roots. The Hmong diaspora, right, where Hmong people started getting spread all over the world. There's a loss of history with that. And when I met my husband, he started to actually challenge me to start to dig back into my roots. I started to talk to my elders. I started to talk to uncles, my parents. And I understood then that my passion didn't just pop out of nowhere, that I have these roots. I have my grandfather, Blake Alva. He was a social justice fighter. He was committed to the people. He was so committed that he chose to stay behind in the refugee camps as a symbol of a leader for the Hmong.
Wow.
Right? And refused to come to the United States. And all of his children came to the United States to really make a way for themselves. So it's understanding my roots and understanding that I am so much more than what this country tells me I am. That we are so—
I love that statement. I am so much more. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Dr. Vang, what's next for you? What's on the offing? Someone said, are you doing that book? What's next for you? What's next?
That's a good question, Dr. James. I don't know. I feel like where this work will lead me is where I'm meant to be. And I believe in God, and I believe that God will pave the way for me to be able to influence change. My passion in systems change. I want to make sure that when I was doing individual therapy, that was very rewarding. But that's changed one person to a person to a person. Yeah. And many times people are coming in, it's the systems that are actually creating these people's problems. So I want to be able to influence systems and changes at that level. Wherever that will take me, I really don't know.
Well, we talked about closers during our journey together. You are my closer today. Would love for you to give us a 30-second mini keynote, encouraging us to step up, speak truth to power, be bigger, be advocates. You knew I was going to do this because I'm a speaker. You're a speaker too. So 30 seconds, you're my closer. What do you want people to think, to do? Mic check. Dr. Talee Vang, time for your keynote.
All right. Everyone that's listening, I strongly urge you to learn about who you are and where you came from. I also encourage you to ask those critical questions as you're learning. How do I know what I know? How did they know what they know? And is this fitting with who I am and who I want to be? When we do this deep self-work, then we become more empowered and more rooted to be able to stand up against the winds that blow. It helps us as we're doing this work, as we are making changes in our systems, as we're pursuing social justice. There will be some storms that will be really, really difficult, but root yourselves in who you are.
Root yourself in who you are. Dr. Vang, wow. You always bring it. You brought it again. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time, because I know your time is pretty important, significant. I know you're very busy, but thank you for sharing your wisdom, your thoughts, your experiences, for being so vulnerable and teaching us that we need to root ourselves. Hey, I told you guys, every week, bring a friend, bring two, bring three. This is an informational and transformational experience, and we do it every week. And like I always say, you've just been impacted.